This is an iOS app built in only 4 hours, but how is that possible? You see, this was entirely coded using AI using ChatGPT. I wanted to challenge myself to see if it was possible to build a full iOS app only using AI. And here's the entire process of how it went. First, I needed an idea, so I asked ChatGPT to give me app ideas, but not just simple app ideas. I wanted specifically app ideas that could use one of the APIs available for developers from OpenAI. Some of the available APIs are text generation, image generation, text-to-speech, vision, and a lot more. So it listed me with a bunch of ideas like an AI writing assistant, an AI-powered language learning tutor, an AI recipe generator, and an AI storytelling for kids. Guess which one I chose? If you guessed the last one, then you're right. But I didn't want the app to be specifically for kids, so we're creating this for everyone. Okay, now that we have our app idea, it's time to code, but not me. It's time for ChatGPT to give me all the code. So here's the rough idea of the app I want to look like. I first want an input box where the user can write some text to start off a story. Then from that point, the user can tap a button to create the story. The user gets his first part of the story generated by AI, then he gets 2 random options at the end to continue the story forward. Depending on the action he chooses, the AI continues the story with that option. Then the same thing happens again. A new segment of the story is generated with again 2 new options. This continues forward, generating new segments of the story until the story ends. To determine when the story actually ends, I could either hardcode a value, like let's say everyone's story finishes after creating 5 new segments, but I decide to give that option to the user as a slider on the creation screen so that they can either end their story very fast or have it carry on a little longer. I also want an image to be generated for each segment of the story generated by AI to make things a little more engaging. Oh, and I also want the entire app to be fully built in SwiftUI. So I wrote these exact requirements on ChatGPT and it started generating the code. If I have to be honest here, I really did not think ChatGPT would have got this. I thought maybe it would give me an idea of how to build this, but not the actual code, because my requirements were simply too much. But to my surprise, it actually generated the entire code. It started giving me all the code to call the APIs needed on my app, created the views, classes, and data models on my app. Although the code isn't the best, it still looked like functioning code to me. So I copied everything and pasted it into Xcode. And surprisingly, for the amount of code I copied, there was 0 build errors. So I clicked the run button to open it on the iPhone, and crazy to say, but everything was exactly like I described. There was an input box for the user to type, a slider, a button to generate the story. But the real deal is actually generating the story. So let's try that. So I wrote something, tapped the button, and it started generating a story exactly like I wanted, all using AI. And we even had 2 buttons in the end to continue the story forward. So I tapped one of the options and generated a new segment of the story. Great. But here was the first problem. Now there was no way to continue the story forward because the 2 options were missing. Also, I noticed that it did not generate any image. So without trying to manually debug any code myself, I simply wrote all of these issues to ChatGPT and it started to generate new code for me. And now it looks like it fixed all the problems. There were a couple of other issues here and there, and I asked ChatGPT to continue fixing them, and it started to fix them all one by one with no issues. Remember, I haven't coded anything myself so far. It was all ChatGPT. So far, things were looking great until I saw how much everything was costing me on the OpenAPI dashboard. You see, for this app, I am using 2 APIs from OpenAI. First, text generation, and second, image generation using DALL-E 3. The first one doesn't cost much, but the second one costs a lot. Although here the bill looks like it's only pennies, but you can imagine if thousands of users were to use this, or even millions, then I would have to pay tens of thousands of dollars just to have these images. So I had to find a cheaper way to show images. In the end, I went with a free alternative, which was Pexels, a platform that gives out free stock images and stock videos. So I simply asked ChatGPT to change the image generation process on my app from OpenAI to Pexels. I even gave it some sample code written in JavaScript and asked it to write it for me on my SwiftUI project. And as you can guess, it performed the job flawlessly. Now I had pictures loading for free using the Pexels API. Now this app alone was ready for an MVP. I could release it to the App Store and start collecting some feedback from users. But I wasn't finished. I really wanted to test out how far this development could go with ChatGPT. So I asked it to create me a brand new feature into the app, and that feature was history. Having a history of all the stories you've created so far would be great. You could go inside and explore all the stories you've created in the past. So for this, a lot of things needed to happen, but I'm going to summarize it to this. First, we needed the button to access the history, and then have a new page that lists all the past stories you've created so far. And when a story is tapped, we need a new page to actually see the story you've just clicked. I also asked it to specifically use Swift data to persist the data, so that in our case, we can save and load the data of the past stories using Swift data. Some pretty big requirements here, but I wrote all that on ChatGPT and hope for the best. So it started to generate some new code. So before I even had the chance to test out this new code, I saw that it used core data to save and load the data. Core data, like Swift data, is a system to load and save data into the iPhone storage, but Swift data is newer, lightweight, and honestly way easier to write code for. So I prompted ChatGPT again and asked it to make sure to use Swift data and not core data. So it realized its mistake and generated the right code this time. Now everything looked perfect. I copied and pasted all the new views, the new Swift data code, and everything else into Xcode. This was a pretty big change to the app, but after running everything, it looked like the core functionality of the app remained the same, and I could see that there was a new button for the history. The app navigated to a new page, but there was no history of the new story I just created. So I knew there was something wrong with the Swift data code that ChatGPT generated for me. So I asked it to fix it for me, and then the app worked amazingly. The history page showed all the past stories created, and tapping one of them would show me the entire story, including the images used in each segment of the story. So I then also asked it to give me a way to delete the stories from the history page. So it gave me the code for that, and it was now possible to swipe to delete a story in the history list. It looks like I can continue adding new features into the app unlimitedly without writing any code. And I'm going to continue adding new features, but for this video, I'm going to leave it at this. As you can see, it's fully possible to create an app fully using ChatGPT. If there are any features you would like me to add, let me know in the comments. Also, if you want to see the full guide on how I built this entire thing step by step, click the link below. Like and subscribe. Peace.